The wind moved through the sagebrush like it knew what the men inside did not. In the ranch house, a hand slammed down on the papers at the kitchen table. One brother stared at his plate. Another stood fast, chair scraping the floor. She grabbed the old revolver from above the fireplace. The door flew open into the night. She ran barefoot across the frozen ground, the gun pulling at her arm, her dress catching and tearing on every low branch. One shot cracked the darkness wide open. Sharp, final, a line no one could uncross. She crossed the creek and kept running, lungs on fire, the shouts of pursuit rising behind her in the dark. From the ridge to the east came slow hoofbeats on hard earth. A pale horse, a rider moving calm and deliberate toward the echo of that shot. Not chasing, just coming. The wind shifted, carrying the creak of leather and the sound of more horses now, from two directions. She pressed her back against the cold boulder, the revolver still warm in her grip, and waited for whatever the night had decided to send next. Wyoming Territory. April 1878. The wind came first, always did out here. Before the cold, before the dark, before anything else decided to show up and make things difficult. May Calloway heard it move through the sagebrush outside her window. That low, mournful sound, like the land itself was exhaling, like it was trying to say something she didn't have words for yet. She didn't sleep. Hadn't slept right in 3 weeks. Not since Boyd sat her down at the kitchen table, folded his hands like a man at prayer, like a man who had already made peace with what he was about to say, and told her what he'd done, what he'd decided. For her, without her, she was 22 years old. She had calloused hands and sharp eyes, and could read a cattle ledger faster than any man on the property. She had opinions about the North pasture rotation and strong feelings about the price of feed corn, and she had never, not once in 22 years, been asked about any of it. Boyd didn't ask about the marriage either. He announced it. Silas Pruitt, 60 years old, owned more land than most men saw in a lifetime. Had a handshake that lasted too long, and eyes that moved over things, over people. The way a man calculates what something might fetch at auction. He'd been widowed 4 years. Everyone in the territory knew it. Everyone also knew he wasn't lonely. He was shopping, and Boyd Calloway had debts. The Calloway Ranch had been bleeding money since their parents died. Fever winter of 1873, fast and merciless, and it didn't ask permission either. Boyd took over at 26 with 2 younger brothers and a sister, and a property that owed more than it owned. 5 years of decisions. 5 years of Boyd deciding. This was just the latest one. Pruitt would wipe the debt, keep the land in Calloway hands. All he wanted in return was May. Boyd called it practical, called it the only way. Sat across that table with his jaw set and his eyes steady and said, "You'll understand eventually." May understood immediately, just not the way he meant. The night it happened started quiet. Supper was tense in the way suppers had been tense for 3 weeks. Hank, 28, Boyd's shadow, always had been, didn't look up from his plate. Cass, the youngest at 24, kept glancing at May like he was waiting for something. Like he already knew what was coming and hated himself for it. Boyd waited until the dishes were cleared. Then he set the papers on the table. Marriage agreement. Pruitt's signature already on it. Neat. Permanent. Done. Just needs yours, Boyd said. May looked at the paper, then at Boyd, then at Hank, who studied the grain of the table like it contained the secrets of the universe. Then at Cass, who finally met her eyes and looked away. That was the moment she knew nobody was going to stop this. Nobody was going to stand up. Nobody was going to say the word that needed saying, so she said it. No, Boyd's expression didn't change. That was the terrifying part. He'd expected it. Planned for it. Had already decided what came after no. May. I said no, Boyd. You don't have a choice here, and then his hand came down on her wrist. What happened next happened fast. The way things do when someone pushes past the last line. May had her father's Colt Navy on the shelf above the fireplace. Hadn't moved it since he died. Kept it there because it felt like keeping something of him in the room. Some piece of the man who'd taught her to shoot at tin cans on fence posts when she was 8 years old. Women ought to know how to protect themselves, he'd told her. World's got enough women who can't. She grabbed it on her way out. 3 brothers between her and the door. Boyd at the table. Hank standing too fast, knocking his chair back. Cass frozen in the middle of the room like a man split clean in two by something he couldn't name. Boyd grabbed her arm. She twisted free. Hank reached for her and she ducked under his grip and hit the door with her shoulder, and it swung wide into the cold, April night. She ran, didn't think. Didn't plan, just ran. The ground was cold through her boots. Then her boots were gone somewhere, lost in the first 100 yards, and the ground was cold through her stockings. And then her stockings were torn and it was just cold through skin. She ran anyway, over the fence line, through the sagebrush, down toward the creek she'd crossed 1,000 times in daylight, and only once before in the dark. She heard Boyd shouting behind her. Heard Hank's boots on the porch. Heard Cass, quiet, not running, not shouting, just quiet. She got to the creek and she stopped and she raised the Colt Navy to the sky, and she pulled the trigger. One shot, clean and loud, splitting the dark like something that couldn't be unsaid. A warning, a signal, a declaration: I am here. I am not going quietly. Come and find me if you want. But you will know I was here. Then she crossed the creek and kept running. Half a mile east, maybe more, maybe less. She didn't know anymore. Her legs burned. Her feet were cut from rocks she couldn't see. Her dress, the plain gray one, the everyday one, not the good one she'd been told to press for, when Pruitt came calling, was catching on everything, tearing at the hem, slowing her down in small, miserable ways. She made it to the boulder field above the lower creek, and she stopped, crouched behind the largest rock she could find, back pressed against cold stone, chest heaving. 5 bullets. She had 5 bullets. She had the clothes she was wearing. She had nothing else. Don't think about that. Don't think about what you left behind. Don't think about the ledger books or the kitchen garden, or the horse you've had since she was a foal, or the quilt your mother made from the dresses she wore before she got sick. Don't think. Just breathe. Just listen. She heard the horse before she saw anything. Hoof beats. Coming slow. From the wrong direction. Not behind her where her brothers would be coming from. From the east, from above. Someone was already out here. Her grip tightened on the Colt. She hadn't fired it in over a year, and her hands were shaking, and she told her hands to stop, and they did not stop. The horse came over the ridge. A palomino, pale gold in the moonlight, moving carefully, like whoever was riding him was in no particular hurry, like they weren't chasing anything, just coming toward the sound. That's worse. That could be so much worse. The rider pulled up about 30 yards away, sat still, looking around, then a voice, low, not loud, not the kind of voice that needed to be loud to carry. Hello? May said nothing. I heard a shot, the voice said, and before that, something else. Figured I'd come see. Still, nothing, from May. She was good at nothing. She'd had years of practice at making herself small and quiet, and easy to overlook in rooms full of men who weren't looking anyway. The rider dismounted. Slow. Both hands visible. He didn't reach for the rifle in his saddle scabbard. Didn't reach for anything. Just stood beside his horse in the moonlight. I'm not looking for trouble, he said. Just making sure someone's all right. May studied him from behind the boulder. Tall. Broad shoulders but lean with it. The kind of lean that came from work, not want. A battered hat that had seen better decades. Trail coat with dust on the shoulders. Boots worn at the heel. A cowboy. Just a cowboy. Just a cowboy could still be dangerous. Just a cowboy could still be working for Pruitt. Just a cowboy could still be anything. But his hands were empty. Had been empty since he dismounted. And he hadn't moved toward her. Hadn't tried to flank her position. Hadn't called out like a man who expected to be obeyed. He was just waiting, like he had time. Like wherever he'd been going wasn't more important than this. May took a breath. How do I know you're not with them? A beat. He turned toward her voice but didn't move his feet. With who? The men who are going to come looking for me in about 10 minutes. He thought about that. Genuinely thought about it. She could see it in the small pause, the slight tilt of his head. I'm not with anyone, he said. Been riding alone for 3 days. My name's Judd Mercer. I just finished a cattle run for the Hollenbeck outfit about 12 miles west of here. I was camped on that ridge, a nod toward the high ground behind him. Heard your shot. Came down. Why? Another pause, shorter this time, because someone fired a shot, and then I heard screaming. And I'm not the kind of man who can sit next to a fire and ignore that. Something in the way he said it, not proud, not performative. Just factual, like it was simply true and he wasn't going to dress it up. May came out from behind the boulder, slowly. The Colt still in her hand, barrel down but not holstered. He looked at her. Feet, bare now cut up, dark with creek mud. At the torn dress, at the gun, at her face, which she knew had bruises coming up on the left cheekbone where Boyd had grabbed her earlier in the week. He didn't look away from the bruises, but he didn't make a face about them either. Didn't flinch. Didn't do that thing men sometimes did where they looked at a hurt woman and their eyes got soft and pitying, in a way that made you feel smaller instead of seen. He just looked, like he was taking in information, like he needed to understand the situation clearly. My brothers are behind me, May said. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe less. How many? 3. One of them won't fight hard. 2 of them will, Judd nodded, already thinking. She could see it. Can you ride? Yes. You want to stand here and have this conversation, or you want to get some distance between you and them first? May looked at the Palomino. The horse looked back at her with enormous calm eyes. Named Grit. She would learn. Later, the most settled animal she'd ever seen, which seemed about right for the man who owned him. I'm keeping the gun, she said. I wasn't going to ask for it. She walked to the horse. He cupped his hands to help her mount without being asked. She took the assist without thanking him. They moved. What May didn't know, what she couldn't have known. Riding in front of him on Grit with her back straight and her jaw set and her father's gun in her lap, was that Judd Mercer had not come down from that ridge purely by chance. He'd been camped up there for 2 days. 2 days of looking out over the Callaway spread and the land around it. 2 days of watching smoke from the Callaway chimney and knowing. Because the Hollenbeck foreman had told him, in passing, the way men in these territories told each other things over coffee. That Silas Pruitt had some arrangement with the Callaway family. The foreman said it like it was just news. Territory gossip. Nothing to get worked up about, but Judd had gotten worked up. Quietly, in the way he did most things, 'cause 3 years ago in Texas, Judd Mercer had heard screaming from a neighboring property and had stayed where he was. Had told himself it wasn't his business. Had told himself he didn't know enough about the situation. Had told himself a dozen sensible, rational, completely useless things, while a woman whose name he'd learned at her funeral screamed for help that didn't come. He'd carried that the way you carry something that has no good place to be put down. So when the shot rang out and the screaming started, this time, he came down because he had to, because the alternative was another 3 years of carrying something heavier. May didn't know any of this yet. She was watching the dark landscape move past her. Grit walked steady and sure, like each step was considered, like the terrain was something to be respected rather than rushed. Judd didn't tell her. Not yet some things you earn the right to say. What May also didn't know, what was already in motion before they reached the cabin, was this. Boyd Callaway had not panicked. That was the thing about Boyd. He didn't panic. He calculated. When May ran, when she shot that warning and disappeared into the dark, Boyd stood in the doorway of the ranch house for exactly 30 seconds, listening, thinking. He knew this land, every ridge, every creek crossing, every place a person on foot might shelter or rest or hide. He knew where a frightened young woman running east would end up. Dry Fork, 40 miles southeast, the nearest town, the nearest help, the nearest anything. Boyd turned to Hank. Take the eastern route. Get to Dry Fork before she does. Find a place to wait. Hank didn't ask questions. He never did. He just took the eastern route, while Boyd and Cass mounted up to follow May's trail. Slowly, no rush, no panic. Hank was already a ghost moving through the darkness ahead of them. Not chasing May, waiting for her. She wasn't running to freedom. She was running into a box. The walls were just too far apart to see yet. The cabin appeared after an hour of riding. Judd knew it, had spotted it 2 days ago, from the ridge. Old trapper shelter, probably 30 years abandoned. One room, dirt floor, fireplace that still worked if you were careful. Roof that held, as long as you didn't expect miracles. He'd noted it automatically, filed it away. If I needed shelter and couldn't use the ridge camp, that's where I'd go. They dismounted in the dark. Grit was tied loose. Judd never tied him tight, didn't need to. And they got inside before Judd risked a small fire. May sat against the wall on the far side of the room. She'd been watching the dark behind them the whole ride. Still watching it now, through the gap where the door hung crooked on its leather hinges. Judd built the fire, kept it small. "Eat something," he said, holding out jerky and dried corn from his saddle pack. May took it without ceremony. He gave her his spare pair of wool socks and didn't make it a moment. Just set them beside her and moved away. She put them on. Her feet were worse than she'd thought. She felt it now that the running had stopped. "You from around here?" Judd asked. "Born on that ranch, and now?" May looked at the fire. "Now I'm not." Judd didn't push. He sat across the fire and drank cold water from his canteen and looked at the door. They talked. Or May talked, in pieces, the way a person does when they're still deciding how much is safe to say. She told him about her parents, about the fever, about Boyd taking over and the slow years of debt and Pruitt circling closer each season like a patient bird over something not quite dead. Judd listened. Really listened. Not in the way men sometimes listened, waiting for the right moment to interject, to offer solutions, to redirect things toward themselves. He just listened. "He signed a contract," May said. "Boyd did. With Pruitt. I was in it. Like a..." She stopped. Couldn't finish that sentence. Judd finished his water. Set the canteen down. "You don't have to say what you were in it like," he said. "I understand what you're saying." May looked at him across the fire. This stranger. This man she'd pointed a gun at an hour ago. "Why did you actually come down from that ridge?" she asked. He was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, "Because I didn't the last time. And I've thought about it every day since." He didn't explain what that meant. The fire popped once and settled. May didn't ask him to explain. Some things you hear and just understand. She must have slept. She didn't mean to. The exhaustion had been building for 3 weeks and her body made the decision without consulting her. And she woke up with her back against the wall and pale gray light coming through the gap around the door. Morning. Judd was already awake, sitting by the dead fire, keeping watch and not wanting to say so. May was on her feet in seconds. "How long have you been awake?" "A while." "Why didn't you? You needed to sleep." She opened her mouth, closed it. That was a hard argument to win. She crossed to the door and looked through the gap. The land was gray and quiet in early light. The sagebrush silver, tipped with dew. Grit standing patient at the hitching post Judd had fashioned from 2 sticks and a length of rope, head down asleep on his feet the way horses did. Everything looked peaceful. Which was why May's stomach dropped when she heard the horses. Not 1, 2. Moving carefully through the draw to the south. She looked at Judd. He was already standing. Already had his hand near his rifle. "How many you said would fight?" he asked. "Low, 2. Boyd and Hank." "But," she frowned, "Hank's the middle one. He wouldn't." The horses came around the tree line. "Boyd. And Cass." Not Hank. May's mind caught on that. "Where's Hank?" "Boyd never sends Hank anywhere. Alone." "Boyd never." "Oh, no. Hank's not behind her. Hank's ahead of her." She didn't have time to say it. Boyd had already spotted the cabin. He reined in 20 yards out, unhurried, and his voice came across the morning air like a verdict. "May, come on out. This is done." Judd moved to the door before she could. "Stay back," he said quietly, "just asking." Like he was doing something difficult and needed one less thing to manage. He stepped outside. Boyd Calloway looked at the stranger in the doorway, and his expression didn't change. It was a face built for not changing. "This doesn't concern you," Boyd said. "We're here for our sister." Judd Mercer stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt, standing easy, taking up space the way a man does when he has no intention of moving. "She doesn't want to go," Judd said. "That's all I need to know. You have no idea what you're talking about. This is family business. I understand that. Then step aside." "Can't do that." Boyd's eyes moved to the door behind Judd. Like May was a matter of logistics. Like this stranger was just a complication to be removed. "Who are you, anyway?" "Nobody. You've met. That's about to change." Cass shifted on his horse. May was watching him through the gap in the door. His face, God, his face. He looked like a man standing on ice cracking under him in every direction. Like he'd known for weeks it would come to this, and had spent the whole time hoping it wouldn't. Boyd reached for his rifle, slow, deliberate. The way a man does when he's making a point, not starting a fight. Not yet. Wait. When did Hank? Hank was there. Had come up from the east side while May was watching Boyd from the front, had circled around. Which meant Boyd had changed the plan sometime in the night. Decided 3 men at the cabin was worth more than 1 man at Dry Fork. Or Pruitt already had his own people covering the road. Either way, she was not as ahead of this as she'd thought. "Stop. One problem at a time." Cass raised his rifle. May saw his hands. Saw the way he held it. Not aimed at Judd, not aimed at anything, just raised. Like he was following a script he hadn't written and didn't believe in. His eyes found her through the gap in the door. Found her and stayed. "I'm sorry," those eyes said. Or maybe she was just reading what she needed to read. The shot happened fast. Cass pulled the trigger. The bullet hit the dirt about 2 feet left of Judd's boots. Clean miss. The kind of miss that couldn't be accidental. Not from that distance. Not with that rifle. Not for a Calloway boy who'd been shooting since he could walk. Judd reacted on instinct. His gun was out in a fraction of a second, and the shot he fired went straight and true, and knocked the rifle from Boyd's hand. Boyd grabbed his hand. Not shot, just stung, knocked loose. But it changed things. The morning went very quiet. Boyd looked at his empty hand, at the rifle in the dirt, at this stranger who had drawn faster than he'd expected, and shot cleaner than he deserved. He looked at Cass. Cass was looking at May. Nobody moved. Something moved through Boyd's eyes. Not fear. Boyd Calloway was not built for fear, but recalculation. The kind of man does when the math suddenly doesn't add up. He picked up his rifle, slowly. Like it was his own idea. "This isn't over," he said. To May. Not to Judd. To May. Like Judd wasn't the variable that mattered. Like May was the only one who needed to understand him. "Pruitt will come himself. And when he does, I won't try to stop him." He turned his horse. Hank followed. Cass was last. He turned his horse slowly, looked back once at the cabin, at the gap where the door stood open, at his sister standing in the shadow of the doorway. He opened his mouth, closed it, turned away, and then they were gone. 3 horses, moving back through the draw and disappearing into the silver morning. Judd came back to the door. May was already stepping out. Boots on now. She'd found them near the door, in the dark, had put them on while the confrontation played out, because her feet hurt and she wasn't going to be caught barefoot in whatever came next. She looked at where Boyd's rifle had landed. At the scuffed earth. At the direction the horses had gone, already invisible. "He meant it," she said. "About Pruitt. I know. This isn't finished." "No." She turned and looked at Judd Mercer standing in the morning light. This cowboy from Texas who'd come down off a ridge because he'd made a different kind of mistake once and couldn't unmake it. "Where were you going?" she asked. Before all this, he thought about it. Honest thought. South. Maybe Colorado. "I had some money from the Hollenbeck run. Was thinking about land." "Were you serious about that?" "The land?" "I've been thinking about it for 3 years. May looked at the horizon. At the direction of Dry Fork, 40 miles of open country, sage flats and creek crossings and rising ground. At the Palomino horse standing patient at the hitching post. "There's a town," she said. "Dry Fork, 40 miles southeast. Small but real, I know it. Passed through 3 years ago. They'll look for me here first. But if we move, we should move." She nodded. Looked at him one more time. At this man who'd driven off her brothers and asked nothing for it, and was now talking about what came next like she was part of the equation. She wasn't used to that. "You didn't have to do any of this," she said. Judd untied Grit, checked the cinch. Didn't answer right away. Then, "Yeah, I did." He cupped his hands to help her up. She took the assist. Didn't thank him, but she didn't keep her hand on the gun the whole ride this time. That was something for May Calloway. In the April morning of 1878, with cut feet and borrowed wool socks and 40 miles of open country between her and whatever came next. That was something. They rode for 2 hours before Judd said anything else. The sun came up. Wyoming spring sun. That particular quality of light that made the sagebrush look silver and turned everything else gold. Beautiful. It was genuinely beautiful out here. She'd grown up in this landscape, and somewhere in the last 5 years of shrinking and managing and making herself acceptable, she'd stopped seeing it. She saw it now. "Tell me about the other two," Judd said. "The brothers, Cass, and the one who wasn't there this morning. Hank follows Boyd, always has. Not cruel exactly, but not strong. Easier to follow than to think. And Cass?" May was quiet for a moment. "Cass used to be different. When we were young, he was the one who'd argue with Boyd. Push back, say when something wasn't fair, a pause. Somewhere in the last few years he stopped. His shot this morning," Judd said. "He missed on purpose. It wasn't a question." "I think so," May said. "That means something. Maybe. Or it means he still doesn't have the spine to make it matter." Judd didn't answer that, but she felt him nod behind her. "What about you?" she asked. "What about me? You said you've been riding for 3 years, since Texas, working my family's property before that. South Texas. Hill country. What happened to it?" "Drought, then debt. Then nothing left, a beat. My parents didn't make it through the bad year." May absorbed that. "I'm sorry. It was 3 years ago," said like that, answered it. Like 3 years was enough time that sympathy was no longer required. She recognized that particular kind of management. She'd done it herself. After a while, she said, "What you mentioned last night. About the last time. The time you didn't come down." He didn't answer immediately. "You don't have to," she started. "There was a woman," he said. "Neighbor. Property. I heard sounds. Things I should have investigated. I told myself it wasn't my place. Told myself I didn't know enough to interfere. The long pause. She died, not that night. But eventually. And nobody said that what happened to her mattered. Because the man who did it was her husband, and that was considered his business. The morning birds were singing somewhere, in the brush, to their left. The world just going on. It mattered," May said. "I know that now." "It mattered, then too, yeah. I know that too." She didn't say anything after that. Neither did he. But something settled between them, not comfort exactly, more like recognition. Two people who'd each been carrying something heavy, finding out the other one knew what heavy felt like. Grit walked steady under them both. The town of Dry Fork was still 30 miles ahead. Boyd was behind them, getting smaller. Pruitt was ahead of them, though they didn't know quite where, and Cass Calloway was somewhere in between. Carrying a secret nobody had asked him about yet. The shot he'd fired into the dirt. 2 feet left of Judd's boots, on purpose. May pressed her lips together and looked at the horizon, and didn't let herself think too hard about what that meant. Not yet. She couldn't afford to feel things about Cass yet, later. When they were somewhere safe. If safe was still a thing that existed in the world she'd woken up in this morning, she would think about Cass. She would think about what it meant that the brother she'd given up on had, at the last possible moment, done the smallest possible version of the right thing. She would think about whether small was enough, whether small ever was. The sun climbed higher. Wyoming opened up around them, vast and indifferent and achingly gorgeous. The kind of landscape that made a person feel both very small and, paradoxically, very real. Like the scale of it insisted on your existence, like you had to be something to be here. She'd spent 22 years in this territory and 5 of them, getting smaller. Not anymore. The thought arrived without fanfare, without drama. Just settled in quietly and stayed. She didn't know what came next. Dry Fork was a name and a direction and a hope. Judd Mercer was a stranger who'd done a decent thing and might or might not be trusted with more than that. But she was moving, of her own choosing, in a direction she'd picked. That's something, she thought. That's actually something. Grit walked on. May Calloway kept her back straight and her eyes on the horizon, and she did not look behind her again. Dry Fork appeared in the late afternoon like something that had given up trying to be impressive and decided to just be honest instead. Not a grand town, not a boom town, not the kind of place that made it onto maps drawn by people who cared about such things, just buildings. Wooden, slightly crooked, lined up along a main street that turned to mud when it rained and dust when it didn't. A general store, a livery, a church that looked like it had been arguing with the wind for 20 years and losing, 2 saloons, a doctor's office with a hand-painted sign that had faded to almost nothing, and at the far end, slightly set back from the street like it was thinking about its options, Finch House. A 2-story building with clean windows and a porch that someone had actually swept recently. A sign in the window that said rooms in plain letters, and underneath it, in smaller writing that you had to get close to read, respectable guests only. I know the difference. May read that sign twice. Decided she liked whoever wrote it. They came in from the north. Judd's idea, circling wide around the main road, coming through the backside of town to where the corrals and the woodpiles were. Nobody stopped them. A dog lifted its head from a porch and put it back down. Judd knew the layout of this town the way a man knows, a place he's passed through once and paid attention. Which turned out to matter, because there was a man at the front entrance of the livery that Judd didn't recognize. Just standing, watching the main road in. Not working, not waiting on a horse, just watching. Judd changed their angle without a word. Came around the far side to the back entrance. Settled Grit himself. Paid the stable boy who appeared from somewhere in the hay. Kept his voice low. Anyone come through? Today? Riding hard? The boy. Maybe 14. Ears too big for his face shrugged. Man came through this morning. Took a room at the hotel. Hasn't left. What did he look like? Big. Quiet. Kept looking at the north road. Judd gave the boy an extra coin. You didn't see us come in. The boy looked at the coin. Then at Judd. Then at May, who was standing in the shadow of the doorway, looking like a woman who had crossed 40 miles and lost patience with most of it. See who? The boy said, good kid. Finch House had a back door. Most places did, if you knew to look. And Ora Finch, who opened it before they'd finished knocking, which suggested she'd seen them coming from an upstairs window. Turned out to be the kind of woman who noticed things. All kinds of things. Quickly, without making a production of it. 55 years old. Silver hair pulled back practical. An apron that suggested she'd been cooking and hadn't let the interruption stop her from having opinions about it. Eyes the color of creek water in autumn. Sharp. Measuring. Not unkind. She looked at May from the doorway. Just looked. The whole picture at once. The cut feet, the borrowed socks, the torn dress. The bruise coming in along her cheekbone. The way May held herself straight, because May Calloway did not let her spine give up even when everything else was arguing for it. Then Ora Finch opened the door wider. Room at the end of the hall, she said. Hot. Water's on the stove. Give me 20 minutes. She looked at Judd. Different look. Assessment of a different kind. You staying? For now, Judd said. There's a cot in the storage room off the kitchen. $1 a night. Includes breakfast? Fair, I know it is. She turned back into the kitchen. Supper's in an hour. Don't be late, I don't hold plates. May sat in the tin tub in the room at the end of the hall and felt the hot water work its way through 3 weeks of tension and 40 miles of flight. It didn't fix anything, wasn't supposed to, but there is a particular mercy in hot water when you have been cold and dirty and frightened, a specific kind of grace that has nothing to do with solutions and everything to do with surviving until you can think, she thought. Boyd knew I'd run east. He planned for it. Which means he's been watching me prepare for this, even when I didn't know I was preparing. The man at the livery. Pruitt's man, probably. Which means Boyd told him. She stopped that thought. Let the hot water do something about it. First, the bruise on her cheekbone was yellowing at the edges. Would be gone in a week. She touched it lightly and thought about the night. Boyd's grip had caught her face during the argument 2 weeks ago. The night she'd finally said out loud that she wouldn't sign, and his frustration had gotten physical for just a moment before he pulled himself back. He'd looked surprised at himself. That was the part that stayed with her. The surprise. Like some part of him didn't recognize what he was becoming either. She didn't have sympathy for him. She wasn't built for that right now, but she filed the surprise away. Because it meant somewhere there was still a man who knew the difference between who he was and who he was turning into. That might matter later, or it might not. She'd figure that out when she got there. Supper at Finch House was beef stew with cornbread, and no ceremony whatsoever. Aura put the food on the table and sat down with them and poured herself coffee, and clearly had no interest in being treated like hired help in her own kitchen. So nobody treated her like hired help. Which meant the conversation that happened over that table, May had almost forgotten that kind existed. You're the Calloway girl, Aura said. Not a question. I was born Calloway. May said carefully, I've heard the name. Boyd Calloway. Does business with Silas Pruitt, Aura said. Pruitt's name, with the particular flatness of someone who has strong opinions and has decided not to perform them. I heard Pruitt was looking to remarry. He found a candidate, May said. She disagreed. Good for her. She's working on the follow-through. Aura looked at her. Something shifted in those creekwater eyes. Not pity. Something more useful than pity. There's a man staying at the hotel across the street, she said. Came in this morning. Big. Doesn't talk to anyone. Keeps watching the North Road, we noticed, Judd said. He's been asking around. Asking if anyone's seen a young woman traveling alone. May put her spoon down. Boyd is thorough. Most men with something to lose are. Aura picked up her coffee. This is a small town. People here mind their own business because it's the polite thing. But they also talk. And they will notice that you're here before long. She looked at May directly. What's your plan? The honest answer was, I don't have one yet. I have a direction and a general intention and a loaded gun, and that is the extent of it. But before May could say something appropriately vague, Judd said, There's a property for sale east of town. Clem Hadley's place. Aura's eyebrows moved. You know the Hadley spread? I looked at it 3 years ago. Didn't have the money then. You have it now? Enough. Aura looked between them. This stranger and this woman sitting at her supper table, like people who had made a decision without entirely knowing they'd made it. Clem wants to go to Ohio, she said. His daughter's been asking him for 2 years. I know, he'd sell fair to the right people. I was thinking that. Aura set down her coffee. Looked at May one more time. What do you think? She asked, and May realized a small shock, like touching a door handle in dry winter air, that she was being asked, just asked, her opinion, her thought. What she thought. I'd need to see the land, she said. Of course you would, said Aura Finch. Like, that was the only reasonable answer. They saw the land the next morning. Clem Hadley drove them out himself in his wagon, 68 years old. Hands that told the whole story of his life, broken in 3 places, thick through the knuckles, scarred across the right palm from something that had happened long ago and hadn't stopped being part of him. A white beard that had given up pretending to be any other color. Eyes the pale blue of an October sky. He talked about the land the way people talk about things they love and have to leave slowly, with the specific care of someone measuring their words, because the wrong ones might undo something. The property was 280 acres, a valley between two ridges sheltered on the north and west. A creek that ran clear year-round. Clem pointed to it with a kind of pride that had nothing to do with ownership and everything to do with knowing something good when you live beside it. A house. A barn. 3 outbuildings. 40-some head of cattle in the south pasture. $900. That's more than fair, Judd said. I know it is. I'm not looking for top dollar. I'm looking for the right people. He said it, and then he looked at them. At Judd first, then at May, and the look he gave May was the more serious one, like he was asking her specifically to answer something he hadn't said out loud. May had been walking the land while he talked. She did the same thing her mother had done, touched the soil, pressed her fingers into it, and felt the texture, and the moisture and the composition the way you can when you've grown up in dirt and learned its language. Good soil in the flat sections. Rocky but manageable on the slopes. The pasture grass was winter. Thin, but the root structure was strong. She'd seen enough to know what this land would be in the right hands with enough patience. She walked to the creek and crouched down and looked at the flow. Strong, cold, the kind of reliable that kept animals through drought and kept gardens through heat. She straightened up. The fence line on the north ridge. How long since it was repaired? Clem scratched his jaw. 2, maybe 3 seasons. It'll need full replacement before winter. Probably. The garden plot behind the house has been left. My wife tended it. I haven't had the heart. May nodded. Looked at the plot. Then at the house. Then at the barn. I want in, she said. She said it to Judd. But she looked at Clem when she said it. Clem Hadley looked at her for a long moment. Something in the pale blue eyes that was not quite a smile, but was the ancestor of one. Well then, he said, let me show you the north pasture. Best grazing on the property. The business part happened over coffee on Clem's porch in the afternoon. Judd had $940 in a money belt under his shirt. 3 years of cattle work and no family to send money home to, and no vices worth spending on had added up to something specific and useful. He put $800 on the table and asked Clem if the remaining 100 could follow, in the spring after the first cattle sale. Clem said yes before Judd finished the sentence. Then he looked at May. Miss Calloway, your share of this arrangement. Judd mentioned you'd be working the property as partner, equal partner, May said. On what terms? My expertise in labor until I've built enough capital to buy in formally. 6 months, maybe 8. Then we renegotiate with real numbers. Clem looked at Judd. Judd shrugged. Her idea. I think it's fair. It is fair, Clem said. He looked at May with something that might have been appreciation. The kind that recognized competence without needing to be surprised by it. Unconventional, he said. Wyoming, May said. He laughed. Short and real. Wyoming, he agreed. He extended his hand to Judd, then to May, and the handshake with May lasted just as long as the one with Judd. The first week was work, pure and simple. The house needed cleaning. That wasn't about dirt so much as about the particular heaviness that accumulates in spaces where people have been sad. Clem had been sad in these rooms for 2 years since his wife passed. May could feel it. Not dramatically, not in a haunted house way, just in the quietness of the corners and the settled dust and the empty window boxes where things had once grown. She cleaned it the way her mother had taught her. Thoroughly, starting at the top and working down, opening windows to let the April air through. Judd was outside, repairing everything that needed repairing, which was considerable. The rhythm of his work reached her through the open windows. Hammer on wood. Boots on gravel. The occasional low word to Grit, who had developed an unsettling habit of following Judd around the property, like a very large and unhelpful dog. Clem stayed for the week. He'd promised to. He showed Judd the cattle and the land boundaries and the particular quirks of the water system. He showed May the kitchen garden and the root cellar and the smoke house, and where the good firewood was, and where the not-so-good firewood was, and how to tell the difference. He taught like a man who'd spent decades figuring things out, and now very much wanted the figuring not to be lost. The last evening, he sat with them on the porch and drank coffee and looked at the land going golden in the late light. "Margaret would have liked you both," he said. "She had a nose for people." "What would she have said about us?" May asked. Clem thought about it. She would have said, "You're both carrying something. And that carrying things together is easier than carrying them alone." A pause. She was usually right. In the morning he was gone before they woke. Just a note on the kitchen table in handwriting that had gotten shaky but was trying not to be. "Look after the north pasture fence. The east corner is worse than I told you. CH." The first month was not a love story, let that be clear. It was a business arrangement between two practical people who were both too tired and too busy and too cautious for anything else. They divided the work without ceremony. Judd took the cattle and the heavy maintenance and the dealings in town. May took the household and the garden and the ledger books. But the division was not rigid. When the spring planting needed 2 pairs of hands, Judd put down whatever he was doing and helped. When a fence section was worse than expected, May picked up tools and was there by mid-morning, without being asked. The evenings were quiet in a way the Calloway Ranch had never been. She didn't know what to do with that at first. Then she learned Twist 4 arrived 6 weeks in. On a mid-morning in late May, a knock at the door. A man in a good suit that was slightly too warm for the weather, and shoes slightly too clean for Wyoming. He introduced himself as Emmett Stanhope, attorney at law, representing Mr. Silas Pruitt of Casper, Wyoming Territory. He had papers. Of course he had papers. May read them at the kitchen table while Judd stood in the doorway. And Stanhope stood near the door with the expression of a man who delivers unpleasant things for money, and has made a separate peace with that. The papers said May Calloway was party to a binding family agreement, established through a contract between Boyd Calloway and Silas Pruitt, in which her participation in a marriage arrangement was agreed to by her legal guardian, being her eldest brother, Boyd Calloway. Her departure constituted breach of said agreement. Damages were being sought. Legal guardian, May thought, "I'm 22 years old. Boyd is not my legal guardian. That hasn't been a legitimate claim since I was 17. Which Pruitt's lawyer probably knew, which meant this was not about winning. She put the papers down. "Mr. Stanhope, Miss Calloway, does your client actually believe this will succeed in court?" Stanhope's expression didn't move. "My client believes the process itself is instructive." And there it was. The lawsuit wasn't the point. The lawsuit was the message. "I know where you are. I have resources you don't. I can make your life expensive and slow and uncertain for as long as I choose." May folded the papers, set them at the edge of the table. "Thank you for delivering these. You can tell your client the answer is still no." Stanhope picked up his hat, looked briefly at Judd with the expression of a man calculating odds, then looked back at May. "Good day, Miss Calloway." He left. The door closed. May sat very still for approximately 10 seconds, then she stood up. "I need a lawyer. I know one," Judd said. Everett Noss had a small office above the general store that smelled like pipe tobacco and old case files and the specific mustiness of a man who had been ill for a long time and had made a friend of his limitations, 62 years old. Originally from St. Louis, where he'd practiced for 20 years before he twung his lungs, Wyoming's dry air was preferable to Missouri's river damp. Thin hands. A slight cough he'd stopped bothering to excuse, but his eyes were sharp. Sharp the way eyes get when the rest of the body starts winding down, and the mind decides it will not go quietly. He read Pruitt's papers in 4 minutes. Then he read them again. "The guardian claim is nonsense. You're an adult. That would be dismissed immediately, I thought so. The contract itself is the question. The issue is whether your consent was documented or assumed." "It was neither," May said. "I was never asked. And can you prove that? Were there witnesses when Boyd signed?" "There would have to be," Noss said. "Any contract Pruitt drew up would have witnesses. Then the witnesses either saw me sign or they didn't. Correct. I didn't sign. Then someone witnessed the absence of your signature. May looked at him. Or they lied about it. Also possible. Noss set down the papers. I would need to know who witnessed that contract. And I would need them to tell the truth about what they saw. Is that achievable? He considered. Most people prefer truth, given sufficient reason to prefer it. The difficulty is giving them sufficient reason. What would that look like? That, is what we need to figure out. The second month was different from the first, not in the work. The work stayed the same, hard, constant. The cattle didn't care about legal proceedings. The fence line certainly didn't. The garden was coming up stubborn and demanding in the way gardens do, and May spent every morning in it before the heat built. What changed was something smaller. Something that happened in increments so fine you couldn't point to any single moment and say, there. That's when it shifted. It was mornings. Judd made coffee at dawn. Always. One of his fixed habits, dependable as the sunrise it accompanied. He made it strong. Strong, in a way that May, who had grown up on the thin ranch coffee, Boyd stretched to last the week, found slightly alarming at first and then indispensable. She started getting up earlier. Not because she had to. Because the coffee was ready, and the porch was quiet, and the light on the ridge at that hour was a specific shade of gold that lasted maybe 20 minutes before the day became ordinary. Judd was always already there when she came out, sitting on the top step, watching the ridge. Grit standing nearby being decorative, they'd drink coffee. Sometimes he'd say something about what he planned for the day. Sometimes she would. Sometimes neither of them said anything at all for 20 minutes, and that was just fine. She stopped noticing she was doing it, the getting up early. The coffee. That was the thing about habits. They stopped feeling like choices. Cass arrived on a Tuesday in the third month. May saw him from the garden, recognized him at the road gate before he was close enough for his features to be clear. Just the shape of him, the way he sat a horse, the particular set of his shoulders that she'd known her whole life. She stood up from the garden row, didn't move, didn't call out, just watched him come. He stopped at the gate, didn't open it, sat on his horse with his hat in his hand, already off, already held, like he'd taken it off a mile back and had been holding it this whole way as a kind of advance apology. Nora, he said, and then caught himself. May, sorry. He'd called her that since she was 12, short for her middle name, Eleanor, that their mother had used when she was small. Boyd had put a stop to it somewhere along the years, said it was childish. Nobody else used it. Not anymore. The fact that he'd used it now and then caught himself said more than he probably meant it to, Cass, she said. Silence. The gate between them. I'm not here for Boyd. He doesn't know I came. Where is he? Ranch. Where else? A pause. He's not well. Angry, he's mostly angry. That's not new. No. Cass looked at the gate, at his hands on his hat. Can I come in? May looked at him for a long time. At the brother she'd grown up with, who'd bickered with her over chores and defended her against schoolyard nonsense when they were children. And gradually, over 5 years of Boyd's shadow, growing longer and heavier, had turned into someone who watched her be held down and stayed where he was. Can I come in? I beg your pardon. The last time I saw you, you fired a gun in my general direction. Except you missed. Except you missed on purpose. She opened the gate. Judd's in the barn. If you're going to be here, you're not hiding from him. I wasn't planning to. Judd came out of the barn as they approached. He saw Cass. His hand moved. Reflex. Stopped midway. And then he was still. Cass stopped too. Mr. Mercer, Calloway, I owe you. You don't owe me anything, Judd said. You owe her. A long pause. Cass looked at May. I know, he said. The three of them stood there. The barn behind Judd and the house behind May and Cass, in the middle of the yard holding his hat. Boyd told Pruitt where you are, Cass said. He did it 2 weeks ago. I should have come sooner. He stopped. I was afraid to. Of Boyd? May asked. Of you. That surprised her enough that she didn't have a quick answer. Pruett's lawyer was already here, she said finally. We know, there's more. Boyd's been talking to people, neighbors, saying you left with a man, saying things that aren't true. He's building a version of this where you're the problem, where what happened to you is a story he gets to tell. Judd made a sound, very quiet, the kind that wasn't quite a word. He can say what he wants, May said. And she meant it to sound stronger than it did, but it came out tired because this was the thing that was hardest to fight. Not Boyd's fists or Pruett's lawyers. This, the story, the version of her that other people would hear and believe because they'd never meet her, and so the first version they got was the one that stuck. She'd watched it happen to other women, the lawsuit, Judd said. There were witnesses when Boyd signed that contract. Do you know who? Cass thought. 2 men from Pruett's side. And, he paused. Clem Hadley. The name sat in the air. May looked at Judd. Judd looked at Cass. Clem Hadley, who sold us this property, Judd said. Yes, and he was there. He was there. Long silence. The creek running somewhere to the east, grit shifting. In his stall, did he see May sign? Judd asked. May wasn't there. Boyd signed for her, and Clem said nothing. He witnessed what was in front of him, and he said nothing about what wasn't. May turned and walked away. Not dramatically, just away. Toward the fence line. She stood there with her back to both of them, and her hands on the top rail, and looked out at the pasture. Clem Hadley. The man who sold them this land at a fair price, and stayed a week to teach them what he knew, and shook her hand like it meant something, and went to Ohio with his conscience and his daughter's address, and he was there. He was there. And he said nothing. She understood why. She understood fear. She understood Pruett and what his name meant in this territory. She understood all of it intellectually, in the part of her mind that was practical and fair. The other part was simply furious. After a while she turned around. Judd and Cass were exactly where she'd left them. Neither had moved. Just waited for her to be ready. Where is Clem now? She asked. He left for Ohio week before last, Judd said. Noss will know how to reach him. Probably, if Clem comes back and tells the truth. It changes things, Judd said. Yes, they looked at each other. This specific look they'd developed over 3 months of working together. Shorthand. Almost. A way of communicating the shape of a problem without needing all the words. Cass watched this exchange and May saw him register it. The particular ease that existed between 2 people who have been in close proximity to difficulty long enough that they've stopped performing for each other. His expression did something complicated. I'm sorry, he said, quietly. To May, not looking at Judd, for what I did, and for what I didn't, May studied him. 24 years old and already carrying the face of someone who'd made a choice they couldn't unmake. I know, she said, not forgiveness, not yet. Just acknowledgement. Which was something. Which was the beginning of something, even if neither of them could name it yet. Boyd's going to know you were here, she said. Eventually, I know. What then? Cass looked at the property around them. The house. The barn. The garden. The cattle in the south pasture. Then I'll deal with what comes, he said. Judd moved. Just slightly. A loosening of the wariness in his shoulders. Supper's in 2 hours. If you're staying. Cass looked at him. Something passed between them. Not warmth, not yet, but something more like mutual recognition. 2 men deciding the situation did not require conflict. I can help with the fence in the meantime, Cass said. East corner, Judd said. It's worse than it looks. Usually is. The letter from Clem came through Noss 3 weeks later. He'd tracked Clem Hadley to Ohio through the daughter's address. He'd written directly, explained the situation, asked his question plainly. Clem's reply came back in under 3 weeks. Noss read it, climbed the stairs to his office, wrote a note to May, come and see me. Bring Mercer. There has been a development, Noss's office, a Tuesday. Early June, he read them Clem's letter without preamble. Clem Hadley had witnessed the signing of the Boyd-Pruett contract in March 1878. He had not seen May Calloway sign or be present. He had questioned Boyd about this at the time, and been told that May's signature would be obtained separately. He had been uncomfortable. He had been afraid of Silas Prudette and his ability to make life difficult for a man trying to sell his property and depart in peace. He had said nothing. "I have been thinking about this every day since I got on the train," he wrote. "I am 68 years old, and I have done a great many things I'm not proud of, and a great many more I am. I would like the accounting to be closer to even before I'm done. I will come back to Dry Fork to testify if it is needed. My daughter will be angry about the return ticket. That is between me and my daughter." May read it twice, held the letter in her hands, felt the weight of it, this old man's guilt, this belated correction. She thought about being angry at him. She was angry at him, and then she thought about how anger is a fire, and fires need fuel, and she had a limited supply, and she needed to use it where it mattered. "When can he come?" she asked. "He's already on the train," Noss said. Something released in her chest, something that had been held tight for weeks. "The court date?" "I've been told Judge Watt is scheduling for late July, 6 weeks. Tell me about Judge Watt," May said. "He is a man who values his reputation. He has known Pruett for many years. He also has known the law for many more." A pause. "In my experience, men like Watt can be compromised only so far. Public testimony. Multiple witnesses. These are things that exceed what friendship can paper over. So we build the case until it's larger than what Pruett can contain." Precisely. Judd had been quiet through this. He spoke now. "Cass Calloway will testify." May looked at him. He looked back. He was there. He saw what happened. "He should say so. He'll have to decide that himself," she said. "Yes," Judd said, "he will." She asked Cass that evening. On the porch. After supper. The sky going dark to the east. Stars appearing in sequence the way they do. First one, then several. Then suddenly all of them. The trial, May said, Noss needs witnesses. People who can say what actually happened. And you want me to. I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm telling you what's needed. What you do with that is your choice. Cass was quiet for a long time. "Boyd will never forgive me," he said. "Boyd hasn't been practicing forgiveness." A short, unhappy laugh. "He's our brother," Cass said, not defending Boyd. Just naming the complication. "He is," May agreed. "He did what he thought was necessary. He did something that was wrong. Those things can both be true, the stars above them. The creek. Grit somewhere in the dark making the small sounds horses make." "What will happen to him?" Cass asked. "If Pruett loses, Boyd loses too. The ranch was already failing, Cass. Whatever Boyd thought he was saving, it was failing." Long pause. "I know," Cass said, very quiet. "The question isn't the ranch," May said. "The question is who you want to be when all this is done." She stood up, put her hand briefly on his shoulder, the first physical contact she'd offered him since the night she ran. She felt him go very still under it, sleep on it. "Tell me tomorrow." She went inside. He told her at breakfast. 3 words, "I'll do it." May poured him coffee. "Okay," she said. Then she put the pot back on the stove and went out to the garden, because the tomatoes needed staking, and the morning light wasn't going to wait. That night, the night before the next meeting with Noss, May couldn't sleep, not the anxious kind, the other kind. The kind that comes when something in you is finishing a process that's been running for a long time, and it needs the quiet to complete. She lay on her back in the upstairs room that had been Clem's wife's old sewing room, converted with a window that faced east, and looked at the ceiling and thought about her mother, who had been a woman who understood difficulty without dramatizing it, who had looked at hard things straight on and said, in essence, "Here is the hard thing." Now what May had tried to be that. All her life since the fever took her parents and the world contracted and Boyd expanded to fill every space that was left. She had tried to be the person her mother would recognize. She thought she'd done an acceptable job, given the circumstances. She also thought she'd spent 5 years directing all that practicality at survival instead of living, at managing instead of choosing, at making herself acceptable instead of making herself real. She was done with that. She heard, below her, The sound of Judd's boots on the kitchen floor. The particular pattern of him moving around down there. Coffee first, then the door, then the porch. His nightly last check. Animals settled. Property quiet. Everything accounted for. She'd stopped noticing she listened for those sounds. Oh, she thought, well, she'd noticed now. Calloused palms. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and looked at the ceiling for a while and said nothing and felt what she felt and didn't try to organize it into something manageable. It had been a long time since she'd let herself feel something without immediately deciding what to do with it. She let it just be there. Just for now. The house was quiet. The creek ran in the dark somewhere to the east. The stars were out. The Wyoming stars that were a different proposition entirely from any other stars. More numerous, more present, closer to the earth than seemed entirely reasonable. May closed her eyes and slept. July came in hot and certain, the kind of heat that doesn't apologize, that sits down in the valley and makes itself comfortable and doesn't care what you had planned. May was in the garden at 5 in the morning to get ahead of it, weeding the bean rows, hands in the dirt. The sky still pale at the edges, 6 days until the trial. She counted them the way you count things you're not sure you want to arrive. 1 finger at a time. Careful. Like, if you counted too fast, you might use them up. 6 days. Clem Hadley had arrived 4 days ago, thinner than she remembered. The train from Ohio had taken something out of him. Or maybe it was the weight of what he was coming back to do. He was staying at Finch House. Aura had given him the good room without being asked and charged him half price without explaining why. He'd come to the property the evening he arrived, stood at the gate, hat in hand. This old man, May had gone to meet him. They'd stood at the gate for a moment, not speaking. May had thought about all the things she could say, all the true and justified things, about what his silence had cost her. About the 100 small ways a person pays for being invisible in a contract they never signed. Then she'd opened the gate. "You came," she said. "I said I would, you did." She'd let him in. Made coffee. Sat across the table from him, while he told her exactly what he'd seen, and exactly what he'd stayed quiet about, and exactly what he intended to say when Everett Noss put him on the stand. She'd listened. All of it. When he finished, she'd nodded. "Thank you," she said. For coming back, he'd looked at his hands. "I should have." "Yes," she said. "But you're here now. Not forgiveness, not quite. But the door to it. Cracked open slightly. Enough to let some air through." Cass had been on the property, every day, for 3 months. By now he knew the fence lines better than anyone. He knew which cattle spooked easy, and which ones you could walk up on from any direction. He knew the grit didn't like the smell of the blackberry thicket on the south end and would sidestep it reliably if you weren't paying attention. He did the work, without drama, without expectation. Like a man paying a debt he'd calculated to the cent and intended to honor in full. One evening May was on the porch and Cass came up from the barn and stopped at the foot of the steps. May, Cass. He looked at the middle distance. "At nothing in particular. Boyd wrote to me," he said. She went still. What did he say? "That I'm a traitor. That I've chosen a stranger over my family. That when this is over, he wants nothing to do with me." A pause. He used more words than that, but that was the shape of it. "He's not wrong," Cass said. "About what I chose. He's wrong about what family means," May said. Cass looked at her then. Just looked. Something in his face that she hadn't seen in years. Not since they were children and he was still the brother who pushed back. Who said when things weren't fair. "I know," he said. "You all right?" she asked. "No," he said honestly. "But I will be," she believed him. Everett Noss had a way of preparing people for testimony that was less like coaching and more like excavation. He sat them down, asked them what they knew. Then asked them what they knew for certain. Then asked them what the difference was between those two things and made them be precise about it. May went through it twice. Then Clem, then Cass separately. When he was done with each of them, he made notes in a small book and didn't share the notes. Just said, "Tell the truth, clearly, without decoration." The truth doesn't need decoration. May thought about that. Without decoration, she spent 5 years decorating the truth, making it more palatable, softer, finding the version of things that Boyd could live with, that kept the peace at the price of her reality. Not anymore. 6 days, 5-4. Pruitt came to the property, 3 days before the trial. May saw him from the kitchen window, not skulking, not sending men. Coming himself, openly, riding up the main road in broad daylight. 60 years old. The years sat heavier on him than she'd expected, like something had been working at him from the inside for a long time. He dismounted at the gate. Judd was already outside. Had seen him coming from the north field. May came out to the porch but didn't go to the gate. Let Judd handle the approach. Watched from where she stood. Pruitt walked to where Judd was standing. 2 men in the July heat. Mercer, Pruitt. Pruitt pulled an envelope from his coat. Held it out, $1,800. Twice what you paid for this property. You sell it back to me. Walk away. The lawsuit disappears. Judd didn't take the envelope. Didn't look at it. Kept his eyes on Pruitt. No, think carefully, I have. Pruitt's jaw moved. You're refusing because of that woman. I'm refusing because this is my property, and you don't have anything I want. Pruitt looked past Judd, found May on the porch, looked at her the way he'd always looked at her, like she was an asset with legs. A thing that had inconveniently developed opinions, Miss Cowboy. This can still be settled. She looked at him. This man who had put her name in a contract she didn't sign, who had sent lawyers to her door, who had watched Boyd Calloway turn, desperate, and handed him an arrangement that made the desperation convenient. She looked at him and felt, not fear. Not anymore. Right out, Mr. Pruitt, she said. He stood there a moment longer, the calculation visible in his face, recalculating, finding that the math still didn't come out the way he wanted. He took the envelope back, tucked it in his coat. You'll regret this, he said. Probably, May said. Most good decisions come with something you have to pay for. That's how you know they're worth it. Pruitt looked at her for one more second. Then he untied his horse, mounted, rode back the way he came. Judd came to the porch, stood at the bottom step. You all right, he asked. Yes, she said, and meant it. The night before the trial, May couldn't sleep. But this time she didn't try to. She got up, put on her boots and her coat over her nightgown, went out to the porch. The stars were outrageous. Always were, out here. The kind of display that made city stars seem like an apology. She sat on the top step. After a while, the door opened behind her. Judd, his boots unlaced, a coat thrown over his shirt, hair that had clearly not been introduced to a comb recently. He looked at her on the step. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything about the hour. He sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching but not quite. The almost was something May had become very aware of over the past months. The particular geography of almost. Nervous? He asked. Yes. Not about losing. What then? She thought about how to say it. About what it takes. Having to prove that what happened to me was wrong. Having to stand in front of a room full of people and make the case for my own. She stopped. My own right to not be arranged like furniture. Judd was quiet. That shouldn't be something I have to make a case for, she said. But here we are, he agreed. The stars turned slowly overhead. Indifferent to Wyoming territorial law and its limitations, we're going to win, Judd said. Not a comfort, not reassurance, just his assessment of the situation. Stated plainly, you don't know that, no. But I believe it. And tonight that's enough. May looked at the stars. Judd, yeah, what you said to Pruitt today. About refusing because this is your property, yes. Was that all of it? A long pause. The creek in the dark. An owl, somewhere in the cottonwood trees to the east. No, he said. That wasn't all of it. She waited. I'm not good at saying things. You know that, I know. So he exhaled. I'll just say that there is no version of this where I walk away. No number on a piece of paper that changes that. Not because of the property. Because of, he looked at her. Because of you, he said. Because of the person who came around that boulder with a gun and borrowed wool socks, and decided to trust a stranger in the dark, and has not stopped being that person for one single day since. May looked at him for a long time. He almost became something else, not quite the something else, not yet. But the door between almost and something else was open now, wide open, standing there waiting for one of them to walk through. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed, and they sat there under the Wyoming stars, together, shoulder to shoulder now, her shoulder against his arm, after a moment, easy and unhurried, settling around her. She let it, and the night moved around them. The trial was in the main room of the Dry Fork Courthouse, which was also the main room of the Dry Fork Town Hall, which was also, on Sunday mornings, the main room of the Dry Fork Church. It was a versatile room, and it smelled like all three of its functions simultaneously: lemon oil and pipe smoke and the ghost of Sunday services. Judge Cornelius Watt presided, 60 years old, gray at the temples, a face that had learned to reveal very little and had spent decades practicing. He had known Silas Pruitt for 20 years. Everyone in the territory knew it. Everyone also watched to see what he'd do with that. The room was full. Dry Fork was a small town. A trial involving Silas Pruitt and a disputed marriage contract, and a young woman who'd reportedly walked out of the most powerful man in 3 counties arrangements. That was the kind of story that filled every seat and left people standing at the back. Ora Finch was in the 3rd row, sitting straight, hands folded, looking at the front of the room with the expression of a woman who had cleared her afternoon for this specifically. May sat at the table with Everett Noss. She had on the blue dress, not the one she'd arrived in. That one was past saving. This one Ora had helped her make. Good wool, fitted properly, the color of creek water in September. She looked straight ahead. Don't fidget. Don't look at Pruitt's table. Just breathe. Judd was in the 2nd row, directly behind her. She couldn't see him, but she could feel where he was, the same way she always knew somehow where he was on the property. Some compass she'd developed without meaning to. Just breathe. Pruitt's lawyer went first, a man named Glendon Fitch, from Casper. Good suit, good voice, the kind of voice that had spent time persuading rooms of people. He presented the contract, Boyd Calloway's signature, the witness signatures, the terms. He said the word agreement 14 times. May counted. She'd started counting at 6. He said the word family 9 times. He said Miss Calloway's reluctance once, like reluctance was a weather system, like it was something that happened to people rather than something rooted in a specific cause. Judge Watt listened, made notes, gave nothing away. Then Everett Noss stood up. He was not impressive to look at, thin, slightly hunched. The cough he'd developed over the winter was better but still present. He moved slowly to the front of the room and stood there for a moment, before he spoke. When he spoke, he used the voice of a man who had found the truth in a pile of papers and simply intended to show it to everyone in the room. The contract presented by Mr. Fitch contains the name May Calloway as a party to the agreement. I'd like to establish for the court a simple question. Was Miss Calloway present when this contract was signed? And if not, who agreed on her behalf, and under what legal authority? Fitch objected. Judge Watt waved it away with the expression of a man who was not going to be rushed on a Tuesday morning. "Answer the question in evidence, Counselor," Watt said. And the evidence began. Boyd was first. He walked to the front of the room with the bearing of a man who was right and knew it. 31 years old, still that same flat quality to his face, the same jaw set, the same eyes that had looked at May across a kitchen table and announced things. He said May had agreed to the arrangement, that he had acted as head of household in his family's best interest, that May's subsequent departure was an emotional reaction, not a legal one. He looked at her once while he was saying it. May looked back. "Don't look away. Don't." She didn't. Boyd finished, sat down, didn't look at her again. Fitch smiled. Noss stood up. He asked Boyd one question. "Mr. Calloway, in your sister's own hand, can you show the court May Calloway's signature on this contract?" Boyd looked at the contract, looked at it. Her agreement was understood. Her signature, Mr. Calloway. In her hand, silence. She didn't sign. Boyd said finally, flat, I signed for her, as her legal guardian, as head of household. Your sister is 22 years old. Yes, she has been of legal age for 4 years. Boyd's nothing. Which means, Noss said, that she required no guardian, and that her signature was the only one with legal standing to bind her to this contract. Fitch was on his feet. Objection. Watt sustained it, but the room had heard the question and the answer. You can sustain an objection. You cannot unhear a truth said out loud. Clem Hadley was next. He walked to the front slowly, sat down carefully the way old men sit, the body negotiating each movement. He was asked if he'd been present at the signing of the Boyd-Pruitt contract in March. He said yes. He was asked if May Calloway had been present. He said no. He was asked if he had seen May Calloway's signature on the contract. He said no. He was asked if he had raised this concern at the time. He paused. A very long pause. The room was completely quiet. I asked Boyd Calloway about Miss Calloway's signature, he said. He told me it would be obtained separately. And did you accept that explanation? Another pause. I did, Clem said. I should not have. He looked at May when he said that last part. She held his gaze, let him see that she'd received it. The room shifted. A collective intake of breath, or maybe an exhale. The sound a room makes when something settles into place. Fitch cross-examined. Tried to establish that Clem's testimony was influenced by his business dealings with the defendants. Clem said plainly that he had sold his property before knowing there would be a trial, and that the two things had nothing to do with each other. He said it simply, like a man with nothing left to protect except the truth. Fitch let him go. Cass was last. He walked to the front of the room and he did not look at Boyd. Boyd was in the back row, had slipped in after the proceedings began. May had felt him enter before she saw him. Some frequency her nervous system apparently still tracked. Cass sat down, put his hands on the arms of the chair, looked at Noss. Mr. Calloway, you are the youngest brother of May Calloway. Yes. Were you present on the night of April 3rd, 1878, when Miss Calloway left the family property? Yes. Can you describe what occurred? Cass looked at his hands for a moment, then he looked up, out at the room. Not at Boyd, not at May. Somewhere in the middle distance where the truth lived when you were brave enough to say it in public. My brother Boyd had papers he wanted my sister to sign. She refused. He stopped, began again. There was physical restraint. She was held. She resisted and got free. She fired a warning shot and ran. Did Miss Calloway agree to the marriage arrangement with Mr. Pruitt? No. At any point? Any conversation? Any document? No. She was never asked. Boyd decided and told her. And when she said no, Cass's jaw worked. He decided her no didn't count. The room was very quiet. Fitch stood. Cross-examination was brief. He suggested Cass was motivated by personal conflict with his brother. Cass agreed that he and Boyd had a conflict. Said the conflict was about exactly what he'd just described, and that it predated this trial. Said it plainly, without drama. Fitch sat down. May heard from the back of the room the sound of Boyd standing up, the creak of the chair, the footsteps, the door. She did not turn around. She heard the door open. Close. He was gone. Judge Watt took 40 minutes, the longest 40 minutes May had spent since the night she ran. She sat very still and held absolutely everything in place. Her face, her hands, her breathing. Don't fall apart before there's something to fall apart about. Just wait. Judd's presence in the row behind her was steady and quiet and solid. She didn't look back, but she felt it. The weight of fire in a room without having to look at it. Or a Finch in the third row. Sitting straight, Clem Hadley, near the window, white beard, pale blue eyes, cast 2 rows back, hat on his knee, these people. These specific people who had shown up because the truth needed bodies behind it. May thought about her mother, not the memory, just the presence of her. The particular steadiness of a woman who had looked at hard things and said, "Here is the hard thing. Now what?" Whatever Watt says. Now what Judge Watt came back, sat down, arranged his papers, looked at the room over the tops of his spectacles. In the matter of Pruitt versus Calloway, he said, the court finds that the contractual clause pertaining to the marriage arrangement of May Calloway is without legal standing, as it lacks her signature and was entered into without her consent or legal representation. He paused. The clause is voided. The lawsuit is dismissed. He banged his gavel once. And that was that. The room erupted the way small towns do. Everybody had an opinion and had been sitting on it for an hour and a half. May sat very still. It's over. It's actually over. She felt a hand on her shoulder, turned. Judd was there, standing behind her chair, just there, looking at her with those careful eyes. She didn't say anything. Couldn't quite. Not yet, he nodded once. Small. Like, I told you. And because she couldn't say anything, she just put her hand briefly over the hand on her shoulder, which said enough. Pruitt left the courthouse without speaking to anyone. May watched him go from across the room, 60 years old, a man who had spent decades using money to make inconvenient things convenient, people to move, situations to resolve, who had met possibly for the first time, a wall that didn't move when you threw money at it. She didn't feel triumphant. In the moment, she just felt complete. Like a ledger that had been unbalanced for months had finally been reconciled. He walked out into the July heat and got on his horse and rode south. She watched him until he was out of sight. Then she turned back to the room. Twist 7 arrived at 11 o'clock that night. May woke to Grit's alarm. The Palomino didn't spook easily. She'd learned that over months. When Grit made noise in the night, it was worth paying attention to. She was at the window before she was fully awake, looking out at the dark property, the barn. Something. Orange at the base. The particular flicker that only meant one thing. Fire. She was out the door before she'd processed it. Boots grabbed off the porch, shoved on running, and across the yard toward the barn and the orange glow that was getting less ambiguous by the second. Fire. The barn is on fire. Grit is in the barn. She heard Judd behind her, his boots on the porch. Fast. She didn't look back. She was already at the barn door. The heat hit her face before she touched it. Not terrible yet. The fire was at the base of the south wall. She could smell it. Not hay, not wood. Something chemical underneath. Lamp oil. Kerosene. Not an accident. The door opened. Smoke. Grit was in the far stall, and he was not calm now. His alarm had been the warning. Now he was fear. Grit. Hey, come on. She got to his stall, unlatched it. He was spinning, those enormous calm eyes not calm at all now, white showing at the edges. She grabbed his halter, pulled. Come on, you infuriating horse. He came, wild-eyed but responsive to the halter, to her voice, to the familiar. She got him moving toward the door. Judd was inside by then. At the south wall, with the water bucket from trough already running it. Before she'd gotten to Grit, on understanding what was burning and what could be slowed, Cass appeared in the doorway. May pushed Grit through it. He practically leapt out into the open air and turned back. There are 2 other horses. I've got them, Cass said. And he went in. May took 3 steps back in. May, the saddles, she said. The rack on the left. She grabbed saddles while Judd threw water. Cass came out with the other 2 horses, then came back for the tack May was handing out of the door in armloads. The fire didn't get past the south wall, not because it wasn't trying. Because 3 people worked it hard in the first 10 minutes, and the structure was thick Wyoming timber, and the wind was calm that night. The south wall was damaged, scorched. The boards at the base would have to be replaced. Everything else held. When the last of it was out, smothered with dirt and bucket after bucket from the trough, the 3 of them stood in the yard, breathing hard, smelling of smoke. Grit standing 20 feet away, looking deeply aggrieved about the whole evening. Cass had a burn on his left forearm. Not serious. May looked at it, found the salve from the house, dealt with it while he held still and didn't complain. Who did this, he said. Not a question, Pruitt, Judd said. Or someone who works for him, after the ruling today. Yes, Cass looked at the scorched wall. He can't let it go. Some men, May said, wrapping the burn with a strip of cloth from her coat pocket, don't know who they are without winning. He lost today. Yes, and this is what it looks like when men like that lose. She tied off the bandage, looked at her brother. You all right? Yes, you went back in for the horses, you went in first, a beat. Yes, she said. I did. Something passed between them. Not resolution, they weren't there yet, not fully, maybe not for years. But recognition. The beginning of a new version of who they were to each other. Built on something real this time. Something chosen. Ora Finch showed up at dawn with two of her neighbors. She didn't ask, she just showed up. Looked at the south wall, looked at the three soot-smudged people in the yard, looked at Grit, who was still maintaining a safe distance from the barn and conveying his feelings through posture alone. Well, she said, we're going to need lumber, and that was how it started. By mid-morning there were 9 people at the Mercer Calloway property. Some she'd known for months, some barely at all. But they came, because that's what small towns do and had always done, and the fact that it was still true after everything that had happened that year was not a small thing. May stood at the edge of the yard and watched people she'd known for 6 months show up to help rebuild what Silas Pruitt had tried to burn down. This is what losing looks like to men like Pruitt, she thought. And this is what it looks like on our end. 2 days later, Pruitt's men were identified. A deputy from the county seat arrived in Dry Fork with papers. The kerosene cans found at the base of the wall. The hoofprints heading south. The man at the hotel who'd left before dawn that morning, and whose description matched a known employee of the Pruitt operation. Pruitt denied it. Of course he denied it. But Silas Pruitt was learning something that money hadn't taught him before. There is a point at which a community decides it has had enough. When a place as small as Dry Fork turns against you, it turns completely. He was investigated. The charges would move slowly. These things always moved slowly, but they moved. And a man under active investigation for arson has significantly less leverage in the surrounding territory than a man who is simply rich and unaccountable. Boyd did not come back. May heard from Hank. A letter, 4 weeks after the trial, the careful handwriting of a man choosing each word like it, was dangerous, May. The ranch is in bad shape. Boyd left after the trial. I don't know where he went. I'm trying to manage, but I don't know how to do what you did. I'm not asking you to come back. I just thought you should know. I'm sorry for my part in it. That's all I know how to say. Hank. She read it twice. Set it on the kitchen table. Made coffee. Stood at the window and looked out at the property, the repaired south wall of the barn, still pale where the new timber had gone in, not yet weathered to match the old. The garden in full August riot. Grit in the near pasture, having reached a cautious détente with the barn. She thought about Boyd. About the version of him that existed before 5 years of debt and desperation and choices that compounded. She did not feel relief at his absence. Did not feel grief exactly. Felt something more complicated than either. The specific weight of a person who had been a fixed point in your world, even a painful one, suddenly not being where they'd been. She thought about writing back to Hank, thought about it for 3 days. Then she sat down and wrote 4 sentences. Hank, thank you for writing. The offer of partnership still stands if you want to rebuild it right. You know where to find me. May. She wasn't sure he'd take it. Wasn't sure he had enough spine for it yet, but she left the door open because her mother would have, and because she was becoming, slowly and specifically, the person her mother had believed she could be. The evening after she sent the letter, she came to find Judd. He was in the far pasture, checking the cattle before dark, the August sun going down behind the western ridge in shades of orange and pink that no painting had ever quite gotten right. She walked out to meet him. He saw her coming and waited, Grit beside him, ears forward. She reached them. Judd looked at her. You wrote to Hank. Yes. How do you feel about it? She thought about it honestly. Like I did the right thing. And like I'm not sure that always feels good, and that's okay. That's about right, he said. They stood in the pasture, the cattle making their way to the lower end for the night. The light that was going to be gone in 10 minutes. May looked at him. This man. This specific man who had descended from a ridge because he'd made a promise to himself in the dark after a failure he couldn't undo. Who had offered her a partnership before he offered her anything else. Who had stood at a gate with an envelope of money on the table and said no so simply, so completely, without drama and without needing to explain himself. Judd, yeah, what you said on the porch. The night before the trial. Yes, I've been thinking about it. I figured you might be. I'm not. She stopped. Tried again. I'm not good at this either. At saying things. I know, so she exhaled. I'll just say that the person I am right now, this version of me, the one who opened the gate, who planted the garden, who stood up in that courtroom, who went into the barn after the horses. A pause. I couldn't have found her without this place. Without what we built here. She looked at him directly, and I couldn't have built it without you. Judd was quiet then. May, yeah. I've been sitting on something since that night on the porch, and I am going to say it now, and I would like you to let me finish. She waited. I came to Wyoming looking for land. That was the plan. Land and quiet in a place that wasn't Texas. He looked at the ridge. I found the land. And I found something else. Something I was not looking for, and do not know entirely what to do with, but am certain about anyway. He looked back at her. I love you, he said. That's the something. May stood in the August pasture with the light going orange around them, and felt the words arrive and settle. I love you, 4 words. No ornamentation, no performance, just put on the table, clearly, the way Judd did everything. She looked at him for a long moment. I know, she said. And then, because that wasn't enough. Me too, since, she thought about when. Since a long time ago, actually, he took a breath. Something released in his face. Something that had been held a while. Okay, he said. Okay? Yes, okay is the word I have right now. May laughed. The real kind. The kind that arrived from somewhere uncomplicated and didn't need to be managed. And Judd Mercer, who did not laugh easily, laughed too. They stood there in the pasture in the last of the August light, and Grit regarded them with deep, philosophical calm, and the cattle settled at the far end, and somewhere in the cottonwoods, a bird made, the particular sound birds made, at dusk. And after a while Judd reached out and took her hand, not dramatically, not with any declaration beyond the act itself, just took it, and held it. And that was that spring, 1880. The sign on the gate had 2 names on it. Mercer, Calloway, Ranch. Cass had made it. He was better with wood than either of them, and the sign showed it. May was in the garden when Judd came in from the north field. She straightened up, pressed her hand to her lower back, the rounded front of her that made the gesture necessary. Judd came through the gate, saw her, stopped. He always stopped when he first saw her. Every day, still. Like he needed a second to confirm it was real. She'd stopped finding it embarrassing, started finding it the best part of the morning. The baby kicked. Hard. Twice. May looked down, then up at the Wyoming sky, vast and indifferent, and full of everything still to come. She did not look behind her. There was nothing back there that needed watching anymore.